So what we have done is established inside the Smith McDowell House the Asheville Museum of History for a number of reasons. One, as a historic house museum, we had the same interpretation, decoration for almost 40 years. It started happening in the 80s. Our constituency, our membership, our visitation had dropped way, way down, even prior to COVID. And we knew we wanted to be able to tell a broader and more diverse history of not only Asheville, but of Western North Carolina. We also received in 2019 a large bequest from a member of the McDowell family, which allowed us to do a lot of much needed, much deferred renovation and restoration to the house. So you all saw us when we replaced the 100-year-old red slate roof with a copper roof, which was the first thing that we did basically to shore up the rest of the house. Before we did anything underneath the roof, we wanted to make sure, which actually Kimberly Kite helped us with, make sure that the roof was stable. So that was the first thing. We've also, since that has happened, pretty much everything we've done has been interior except for painting the exterior of the house the same colors that it already was. So in the interior, we've installed a new HVAC system, so we have climate control throughout the building, repaired a lot of plaster that had fallen throughout the house, mostly due to water damage, redone the modern bathrooms in the house, painted the interior. If you had been in there prior to this year, it had been covered with very ornate Victorian wallpaper for a very long time. In order to repair the plaster, we had to remove some of the wallpaper and then seal in a lot of it. And basically what we did was take everything back to kind of what it would have been like when it was first built in 1840. So we took the walls back to white, baseboards back to dark, very dark brown. And it also had the added benefit of making it into really nice gallery spaces. So we've also installed museum quality lighting in all of the gallery spaces, which are all on the first floor of the house. It's the only accessible floor of the house. We do have an accessible bathroom. We're working with Stephen Lee Johnson to create accessible entrance into the house and accessible parking. Right now it is gravel and flagstone. But we wanted to keep all of our exhibits on the first floor so that they would be accessible to the most people. We do still have 2 period rooms in the house, one in the winter kitchen, which is in the basement, partially because there's nothing else we can do with the basement, and it's also a very interesting space and one that is original to the house, as well as a period room on the second floor, which contains all the various items that we've collected from the original occupants and owners of the house. And so we will still be doing sort of a guided period room behind the scenes architectural tour, which will talk not only about the people who owned the house throughout the years, but the people who were enslaved there, as well as the people who worked there after 1865. So we want to certainly tell that broader history while still giving a nod to the house's history itself and its history as a historic house museum. But the biggest change that you'll see is that the entire first floor is going to be gallery space dedicated to telling the broad stories of Western North Carolina. Guests will enter through the side entrance, which is the most accessible on the gravel drive. We do have the ADA accessible entrance in the back. No one will enter through the front of the house, which has very steep concrete stairs. Once you enter through the front of the house, we will have 2 large gallery spaces, which it's a 4x4 house if you're not familiar with it, and it has a grand archway that was added on. So we'll have 2 gallery spaces, which will have a permanent exhibit. We're working with Design Dimensions out of Raleigh to curate that and have it fabricated and in place for our opening at the end of October. Those portions of the exhibit will be dedicated to the walls as well as kiosks that are movable. They'll be in the center of the room for our regular visitation, but we'll also be able to move them to the walls in order to host programs in those 2 large rooms. If you're not familiar with the house, Those two rooms are split by a very large, wide hallway. It's 35 feet long, and we will have a timeline of Western North Carolina history that will span the entire length of the hallway. Again, will be designed by Design Dimension, designed and installed by them, thank goodness. The other two rooms, which if you have been in the house, I'm calling it the solarium side of the house because there is a lovely sunroom and solarium on that side of the house. But the two rooms on that side will be dedicated to special and changing exhibits. When we open in October, we will have Palaces for the People, which is about Raphael Guastavino and the Guastavino Fireproof Company that built, first Boston Public Library when Raphael Guastavino came over from Spain, but a number of other buildings that I'm sure you all are familiar with across the United States, including the Oyster Bar, City Hall subway stop, Duke Chapel, I could keep going. But here in Asheville, he came for the Biltmore estate, like many people, retired to an estate he built in Black Mountain, and also constructed the Basilica. And so we are also collaborating, certainly with the folks at Christmount, where his estate was and is on the National Historic Register, as well as the Guastavino Alliance. And the Basilica is going through a major capital campaign, so we'll be involved with them, and hopefully Biltmore as well, but that's a little bit more of an ask sometimes. So we'll have that up for at least 6 months, potentially a little bit longer, but that will open again at the end of October, and we will have rotating exhibits come through there. So that's sort of what the layout of the house will look like. We'll be open to the public 3 to 4, probably 4 days a week, and we'll also offer those guided behind-the-scenes tours. Now, that's what happens mostly in the facility. If you've been paying attention to us in the last 3 years, we have really expanded our program offerings. One silver lining of COVID is that people have been much more able to attend virtual things and understand how to attend virtual things. So we've been doing a lot of virtual programming, which is now transitioned into hybrid programming. So we're doing it in person as well as, which I think you all are doing right now, broadcasting it live to folks throughout Western North Carolina, really throughout the country who'd like to attend our events, and then also recording them so that people have access to them after. And we try to do programs on a variety of diverse topics with diverse speakers, and that will continue. We also do hikes, guided tours, and we'll be expanding now that we will have interior space in our facility where we can do programs, to doing programs in that sort of multi-purpose permanent exhibit space. So we're very excited. We have a great dedicated board of trustees. We've got 2 staff members who are very excited about doing this, and so I hope you all certainly will come and visit us when we do reopen. We're looking at August 18th for sort of a first look. October 18th. Please do not come in August. October 18th for a sort of a soft opening first look, and then we'll open to the public very soon after that. So please do come, please do be involved. I definitely recognize a lot of names. I know many of you are members. I think I just got a membership payment from you not that long ago, that I'm still processing. But I'll leave my cards with you all. Our website is on here. We have a brand new website with a lot of our history programs already on there. And so really hope that you all will be involved and spread the word about us, because we really are an entirely new organization. We are still incorporated as WNC Historical Association, but we are the Asheville Museum of History now. This is an entirely new vision, and it's very exciting.
Are you open to the public now?
We are not yet. We do
Just
not.
in October.
Yeah, it's also why I don't have any pictures, because it's still mostly empty.
Couldn't see them anyway.
Yeah. We did just get the Guastavino exhibit mounted, so it's up, but the permanent exhibit is still being designed. So there's not that much to see right now. But we are still doing programming every month, so you can look on our website for the different programs that we're doing. So I'll thank you. Well, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any other questions, but you'll have my contact information. Please feel free to email or call. I'm happy to talk with anybody anytime, and I will stop talking because I could talk forever. We've been working on this for a really long time, and I'm very excited to tell people about it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I'm Chair Sue Oliva, and I'd like to welcome you to the July 2023 Historic Resources Commission meeting. The HRC is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by North Carolina general statutes, the City of Asheville's United Development Ordinance, and Buncombe County Ordinance. We are authorized to hear requests for certificates of appropriateness for alterations, demolitions, new construction, and other work within historic districts, or for the alteration and demolition of historic landmarks and other duties, including preliminary review of subdivisions as specified in the ordinance for the HRC. I'll now ask our commission members and staff to introduce themselves.
Oh, you just have to
Just
say
say
your
your
name
name and your
say
background.
like your,
And
any
talk into the
interest or
microphone.
experience and observation. Okay.
Throwing you right into the fire.
So my name is Claire Thomas. I have been a member of the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County for a little over a year. Career-wise, I am an editor and a content writer. And I've just always loved historical architecture, and my family we're a family of antique dealers, so that's probably why. But yeah. Is that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
I'm Shannon Watkins. I'm a local realtor and a graduate of UNC Asheville.
Amy Moxley, architect.
Sue Oliva, Chair.
Will Hornaday, Albemarle Park, Local Historic District.
Sarah Gross, anthropologist and archaeologist.
Annie McDonald, former SHPO employee, currently architectural historian and consultant.
Maria De Sassi, architect.
Alexander Ellenbogen, architect.
Chris German, architect.
Emily Kite, architect.
We will now consider the...
Janice Ashley, legal advisor to the HRC.
Hey, I'm Alex Cole, staff liaison to the HRC.
We'll now consider the minutes from the June meeting of the HRC. The minutes include the finding of facts and conclusions of law. Are there any corrections?
I'd like to make a motion that we pass the minutes.
Second.
So done. We will now begin the evidentiary hearings for the items listed on the agenda. As a quasi-judicial proceeding, the HRC is not setting policy, nor are we soliciting public opinion on the desirability of an application. The HRC hears and considers evidence. Oh. Well, I'll take a vote now to approve the minutes. Sorry, guys, this is my first reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We will now begin the evidentiary hearings for the items listed on the agenda. As a quasi-judicial proceeding, the HRC is not setting policy, nor are we soliciting public opinion on the desirability of an application. The HRC hears and considers evidence presented and applies the standards set forth in the guidelines and standards of the Pacific Historic District for that application. The HRC must make its decision upon competent, material, and substantial evidence to determine the facts of the hearing. The HRC will use judgment and discretion to apply the standards contained in the relevant guidelines to the facts. The commissioners, having voted for an item, will not have a fixed opinion nor susceptible to change, have a conflict of interest, have engaged in ex parte communication regarding the application. This meeting isn't open to the public, but participation is limited to interested parties who wish to provide commentary or testimony regarding the proposal. If you are speaking as a witness, please focus on the facts and how they relate to the relevant historic district standards and guidelines, not personal preference or opinion. Witnesses must swear or affirm their testimony at this time. I will administer the oath for all individuals who tend to provide witness testimony.
So we can come up if you're ready to be sworn in, if you're going to speak today, or... Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, this is Dan, he's one of our communications people, he's trying to help us take the text.
I think the first matter, you need to continue, right? Do we have to?
Yeah,
Continue.
so old business?
That one was already continued.
Oh, it was already, oh, I'm sorry, so the last time, okay. Sometimes we have to vote to continue, they requested it, but they requested that.
So, old business, we have Montford, 246 Cumberland Avenue. After the fact, approval request to replace metal picket fence surrounding swimming pool in rear yard with brick walls. Applicant Allen Stahl and Kilborn.
Sorry, it's weird to go between a Chromebook and a normal laptop. I forget which to press and what not to. All right, so this first item, I believe, came to the commission in April for the first time, but I'm going to just kind of talk through from the beginning since it's been a minute since we've looked at this application and also have at least one new person. You were here then, I believe. Okay. All right, so this house is at the intersection of Cumberland Avenue and Soco Street. Just a photo of the front elevation for context. The previous owners applied for and were approved to install a swimming pool in the rear yard. It's probably been 5 years ago or so. So this is just a site plan of what was previously approved on the left-hand side, which you can see was the pool with the surrounding pool deck and some additional landscape features, including a small walkway and a greenhouse, which those never got built. So essentially it was the pool and the pool deck. And then on the right-hand side, you see the red line. That's what we're talking about with this application. Essentially what happened was after the original pool was constructed, one thing I don't want to leave out here, although I'm not sure I necessarily have concerns about it, but the paver material that's shown on the bottom right of the slide is what was originally approved for the pool decking. So the pool decking was built out of brick, obviously, instead of the paver material, but that was the previous owner. That's how it was constructed by the previous owner. But as you can see in the photo on the left, that is the fencing was what was approved to be surrounding the pool originally, which is pretty, you're required to have a fence around a pool or a barrier around a pool for building code. And so, we approve rear yard fences all the time. So that was approved in this case. At some point in time, the existing, I should have included more photos, but I think you can probably tell from here, but at some point in time, the fencing was replaced with brick walls. They're about 5.5 feet tall. So that's what we're here to talk about today. When we talked about it at the meeting in the spring, it was a lot of back and forth as to whether or not this meets the standards. The standards do allow for brick walls to be built in the district, but I think the standard that really needs to be determined that has been met aside from just the material is worded, I think on my staff report, the third standard underneath the recommendation that new walls should be sited in locations that are compatible with the traditional historic relationship of walls to historic properties in the district. So that's really the primary standard that the commission needs to find has been met in this case to grant an after-the-fact approval. Since the last meeting in the spring, the commission did, some commissioners were able to make a site visit. We made an organized site visit since it was in the rear yard. It seemed like it would be helpful. So there was a handful of folks that came to the site visit. So I think we're all just interested. I'm interested to hear what the commission's feedback is at this point. I've struggled with this one myself. I don't know that I can think of an example where there are freestanding walls like this in the district. Typically, walls in Montford were cited where one might imagine, like along a property boundary or to retain something, versus this kind of more distinctive boundary around a pool, which pools are unusual in themselves in Montford. I think there's 3 that I know that this commission has approved. And I don't know, like in the folder, I didn't include these in my slideshow, but the applicant did submit as part of their original application a handful of images of other walls in the district. So that's part of their, their evidence to you to support this. And I'll let Derek Allen is here as well as the property owner. I'll let them present any new information that they want to, and then we can just talk it out. Does anyone have any questions for me?
The paver, you have exhibit D for that. Can you explain a little bit more about the significance of the paver?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very
sorry,
well.
the significance of the paver. And so it was that was what was approved previously?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the paver.
Installed.
Yeah, the paver image on below was what was installed or improved rather as part of their original approval, CA approval. And then when it actually got built, it got built in fully compliant with the CA that was previously issued, with the exception of the paver. But then at a later date, the fencing that was previously approved got removed and the walls. So it's got the 2 things that are out of compliance.
Is there a building permit issued for this work?
Yes, I'm sure there was.
Wait, so what are the 2 things that are out of compliance? The first is the wall.
The pool decking. So like the image on the bottom here, that is the material. It's not a brick paver. It's more of like a, I can't remember what it was called. I'd have to unearth the manufacturer spec name, but it's probably some kind of fired paver. It's not totally unlike bricks. I don't really have that much of a concern about the decking
So-
material. I'm just noting that that's something that needs to be
So
part of
that's non-compliant with the original COA, but it was installed prior to the current property owner's acquisition.
Correct.
Okay. And my second question is, did this come to us, to you, to the city as an enforcement action?
Yes.
Okay. And do we know how that came to be? Was that,
It was a complaint from the neighbor.
okay.
And that was, I think, it was a long time between the complaint from the neighbor, and I believe that neighbor has since moved, but that this case has been open for a while now. But to go back to your first question, just to be clear for everyone, enforcement issues run with the property. They don't run with the owner, unfortunately. So we do run into this every now and then where an unknowing property owner buys a house or a property in a historic district and unfortunately doesn't realize that there was work done without a CA. And if we have a responsibility, if we receive a complaint, especially to take action on it. That's generally how we operate from an enforcement perspective. Like, we're not now neighborhood policing stuff.
So should this board, in its decision-making, also make findings of fact and issue a decision about the appropriateness of the paving material as well?
Yes.
Okay. And I had one other question. What was it? Oh, real estate. When real estate is transferred, when it's sold, is notification about existence within an historic district, a locally designated historic district, That is not a required disclosure?
No, and in North Carolina, and Shannon could speak to this, I don't know, I took the real estate class years ago, but I remember that North Carolina is like a buyer's beware state, right? Like where, you know, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have to be disclosed ethically or legally.
Okay.
And I mean, I think I remember Ben Mitchell being pretty knowledgeable about this, that there was some hope from a legislative standpoint that there would be included more information about historic districts and the implications of that, but I don't, you know, obviously I'm not lobbying in Raleigh, so I don't know if there's any likelihood of that happening. We wish that we had more contact with property owners who are looking, and sometimes, you know, brokers are in the know and they do reach out to us, but certainly not always, so.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
I actually have two questions. The first, on the original approved like landscape plan, there looked like there was like landscape screening. Was that placed like at like 3 evergreens to the rear and then plan north?
And not as densely on that north side. I know that I took a picture. I'll try to see if I think I put that one in the file, but may not have put it in my slideshow. These are the two of the pictures that I took when we were.
That real estate picture, the Zillow picture, kind of shows what was left.
Yeah.
I know that right, so like the current property owner has planted stuff along the outside that hopefully will grow to, you know, to mature and screen the walls a bit more. And, you know, I think one other thing that I kind of like can go either direction in is that it is so grown in back there. Like these lots feel very like private to themselves in a way without any barrier existing. So on the one hand, I kind of feel like it then makes the wall less impactful back there, but also simultaneous, it's like, was it really necessary? Because you're not really like invaded from a privacy perspective from the neighbors. Now they might have a different opinion of that being that they use the pool, so I'll let them speak to that. But
From the rear.
yeah, that's the other thing that certainly is helping in the situation is that it is in a rear yard. But I do think, you know, in my opinion, it has to be a site-specific reason. I don't know that is the commission, if they're okay with this in this location in Montford, are you saying you're okay with this type of walls in backyards for every property in the district? It's a tough one.
Oh, wait.
Did you say that there are no other examples of a freestanding brick wall anywhere in Montford?
No, I didn't say that. I couldn't speak to every single freestanding wall in Montford. It's just that there's not a ton of brick in Montford, period. More common was concrete and stone. And there are definitely some freestanding walls. Off the top of my head, I can think of one up the street on Cumberland that's freestanding, but it's stone. And there just isn't a lot of brick in this district, even though it's an allowed material.
And
Sure.
Alex, the one up the street that is of stone, where is it located? Not the address, but where on the property is it
In
located?
front yard. And well, along this, it's a corner lot, so it's in the front and along the side of the property.
And is it a retaining wall or is it a freestanding wall?
Both. There's a part that's just freestanding and a part that actually does retain earth.
Okay.
So there's a variety of different setups. And I can think of a brick wall on Flint Street. It's on the corner of Flint and I'm not going to think of the cross street there. It's not Chestnut. It might be Elizabeth Street. But it has a brick retaining wall in the front, but it's also a retaining wall. It's probably this tall at its tallest. And that there could be other brick walls that I'm not aware of, but you know, that was one thing we talked about with the applicant before the first hearing was, you know, if there are examples that you know of, bring those to support your case. And there's the if you go back to the original application, folder for this project, there's certainly some photos that the applicant submitted as part of their original application. I didn't look at those this time around, but we can go back through those if they're helpful. Can find the location for those.
Excuse me, Alex, can you clarify that? You said the applicant, you meant the prior applicant that got the approved certificate of appropriateness?
No.
Oh, this
This
yeah, the
applicant,
after the fact
yeah,
applicant.
I told them, I was like, you obviously have to make your case to the commission, and having examples of other walls to help support your case is best case, is ideal. And I'm just trying to figure out where those are in our file, but I'll locate those. But in the interim,
So just to clarify, our role is, we're looking at this as if it's a request to build a brick wall that's already there, pretty much. Whether we approve that or don't approve it, it's not, we don't have to find the solution for screening of a pool beyond the code of the fence.
yeah, I mean, basically the commission, how you should be looking at this is if this weren't there. If it were a brand-new application, just imagine this blank slate in this backyard, and an applicant came to you and said, this is what I want to do, would you think it meets the standards? I can imagine if we went back in time 5 years ago, the commission would have been like, well, could you do a fence? Knowing that fences are usually what people put around pools, since it's less visible within the landscape. But again, it's in the rear yard, so.
All pools probably are back.
Yeah, and definitely in Montford.
Could you go back to the current photos and be clear about what parts of the wall? So as I understand from the site visit, a portion of the brick wall was already in place, and that, correct me if I'm wrong, is the retaining wall. That's so small I can't see it. The photos I think are maybe better.
Well, if you pull up this in your packet, it's probably easier for you to zoom in on, but essentially on the right-hand side, the red lines, on the north
I see.
side,
Okay,
and
now I
then,
see where
yeah.
you're-
So those are the sections of wall.
So the
that are-
wall on the south side, the retaining wall and the freestanding wall on the south side were pre-existing and a part of the approved COA.
Right. There's like, when you get to the end of the driveway where the two cars are shown,
Yes.
there's, that was all approved as part, like the wall adjacent to that was all approved as previously and built as it was approved. So it's really just the section along the north side of the pool and the west side of the pool.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Is there lighting on top of that, the currently constructed wall? There's like these black discs that, is it down lighting on the cap of the brick wall?
I think that's what that is. We didn't talk about that. Sorry. I'm sorry. Hang on. You have to wait until you come up to speak and introduce yourself. So I would say, okay, I'll defer to the applicant on that question.
Okay, but that's not a concern of yours? I don't know.
I don't think so. We have lighting standards for Montfort, but they're really more for like building lighting, and I don't think those are so kind of nondescript to me. I don't think they're really that noticeable, but sorry, I hope I didn't sound harsh. We just had at our last meeting, it was like a discussion between the audience for a while, and so we're trying to wrangle that in a little bit. Any other questions for me, and then I can turn it over to them to answer anything else. Okay.
Alex, can we leave that one up, please?
Yeah.
I think that'll be a good.
Yeah.
place to start.
Yep. And we've got there's your packet with all your stuff in it. It's
That
there
last
too.
picture,
So.
yeah, that one, that's perfect.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Derek Allen. I'm with Allen, Stoll, and Kilbourne, and I represent the Dunbars, who are our clients and my neighbors. I live just up the street on Montfort and friends. And we're trying to figure out how to unwind this thing, and if we could go back in time and do this on the front end. I assure you that we would. I assure you that he would and his wife would. So we're trying to get to the right place. I really appreciate everyone coming out and Alex's efforts in coming out and doing the site visit. I think that's important so you can see how remote this is in terms of removed from other properties, removed from the roadways. It's in the back of the yard. It's kind of down in a hole. I think those parts are important. In terms of the enforcement action, it was, we believe, a neighbor complaint. We believe that neighbor is no longer in the neighborhood, and all of the neighbors that Mr. Dunbar's talked to, and the one that came out and asked me what I was doing when I was taking new pictures this week, have said, please, we hope this goes through. And so we do have that support from the neighbors. I know that's only some kind of anecdotal pieces, but they feel good about this. The thing I wanted to do is leave up this picture here, and the one on the left that shows the fence. The reason I'll leave this up is because I've got some photos that were taken today, and we'd like to introduce these into evidence. Did you take these photos
Yep.
that you sent to me today? Does that look like those photos?
Yep.
Can we introduce these into our evidentiary package? I would like to pass these around. I think I've got 10 copies. And you'll be able to see a couple of things here. The decking, and I know you had a question about the decking. That was well before Mr. Dunbar purchased it. And by the way, this is a Griffin Award-winning house. It's a great redo. It's been done with love from the prior owners and these folks as well, and really a gem in our neighborhood. The prior decking, I'm not even sure if it's timely in terms of any kind of enforcement action. I know there's a time period on that. I really haven't been focused on that. We've really been focusing on the replacement of this aluminum fence with the brick wall. And as we're getting these pictures passed out, I want to address another question that's come up and where at least staff has started to focus on or focused on the appropriateness piece of that. And that is the siding of the walls appropriate? And I think there are two questions. One is standalone walls as opposed to retaining walls and where they are in relation to the structure, in relation to the street and neighbors. Another is are the materials appropriate? And here we're talking about brick, and that's an appropriate material in the Montford neighborhood. And then we talked about a little, the discussion was centering on stone walls and concrete walls versus these brick walls. And the example of the house, actually two houses at the corner of Cumberland and Chestnut, and I've got these photos I can pass back around, but those are part of the packet here. And you'll see these walls are a mixture of retaining walls as well as brand new stone walls that are in the front yards there at Cumberland and Chestnut. And those walls are made of stone because the foundations of those houses are made of stone. And if you look at this house here, the foundation of this house is brick, and the retaining walls that are already in the driveway and already approved are brick, and these are really just an extension.
Mr. Allen, I don't know that we might have to pass these, what you've just sent. This is not the same packet they're looking at.
That packet was in the materials that were in
But I thought you said
previously
the
submitted.
original one. I just can't find that. Okay, well, this is for, so remind everybody what this is, and we'll pass this around. This is evidence of other,
These are, so there are two things in here. One is freestanding walls, and the other is materials in those walls, because some of them are not freestanding walls. Some of them are retaining walls that are made of brick, but the brick walls are in there, that are retaining walls are in there to show that brick is an appropriate and well-used material and walls throughout the neighborhood.
okay, thank you.
This first photo in this packet, I want to drill down on this a little bit because I think it shows several things. If you look at this wall here, which is the retaining wall up on the driveway, that was already there and already approved. If you look at this knee wall that comes around and it goes around the entire pool, that was part of the certificate of appropriateness that was already approved. And if you look back here, the wall that extends from the retaining wall, this is what used to be the aluminum fence. So this is the only new piece, and in fact, the aluminum fence gate is still the same aluminum fence gate. So it's the same height, they've just switched out the aluminum fence with the brick. And the brick in the new walls was designed to match the approved retaining wall, the knee walls, as well as the foundation of the house. And the site visit, I think, really played that out, where folks are able to see that those things did match. The second and third photos, actually the second photo here, This one's designed to show the landscaping that has gone on. If you look at the photos from the April submission, you'll see that the landscaping was kind of stark. And since then, they've gone back through and had landscape architects come in and do landscape both interior to the wall to soften it, as well as exterior to the wall where it makes sense and where it will survive. The third photo here, to me, is also one that is significant. One, you can see the new plantings here that's designed to soften this wall. There's no one that can see this back piece if you did the site visit. This is where the rabbit hutches are in the back there, and this terrace is down. But this knee wall that you can see inside and the columns, those are part of the approved piece. This gate here was the original fence that was approved, and you can see how the brick matches to the brick of the house. And again, the last photo shows these already approved knee walls and how they go around the outside of the house, as well as the magnolias against the inside of the new wall, the already approved retaining wall, and then the back of the house. Our plea here is simple. We believe that the materials are appropriate in the neighborhood. We think the staff report this time around is spot on. We think the materials for this particular wall are appropriate to this house in particular, because while there's not a lot of brick houses in Montford, this house absolutely has brick that is featured on this house and is prominently featured on the back of this house. And when you're out there, you can see that the height of the brick on the house matches the height of the brick on the retaining wall, as well as the new walls. To unwind this now really would be devastating to this family and to this neighborhood. We have the support of our neighbors. We think it makes sense. We think it's attractive to the extent that that matters. And we do think that it is consistent with the spirit as well as the letter of the standards set out in the rules. We'd ask for your vote approval and are here to answer any questions or consider any other suggestions you have.
A couple of comments mostly, and I'm sort of waiting a little bit till the rest of those precedent and context photos make its way over here. But Alex, in following up to Chris's earlier question about permitting, I don't see in the city records where there was a permit issued for the wall construction anytime between where we can track the major work application from 2018 through some of the other things that have happened to now. I don't see any record of a permit application from the city for the wall construction. It may not be required.
I think that there's, I could be wrong because I don't work in development services, obviously, or building safety, but I thought you were asking, sorry, for the original approval for
sure.
Everything. That got building and zoning permits. But I don't, if they may not have needed a building permit for the wall, usually building permit for wall is required when it's
retaining,
and we need engineer plans.
So that's just a point of clarification that may be not material to this. My next question, Alex, really is for you and for the applicant to clarify. The landscaping that we're seeing in these photographs was installed since your major work application was submitted for this wall construction.
Correct.
That's correct. Yep.
So, Alex, is that something that would have required a minor work approval? No. That landscaping can happen without approval?
Yeah, we don't typically require a CA for landscape projects unless it's like a comprehensive site plan or it's going to involve build features. But for planting shrubs and trees, we don't require a CA for that.
That's all I got for the moment.
Are there any areas where the new brick wall is taller than the existing driveway retaining wall?
No.
From the, maybe difficult to see, but from the pool floor or from that brick papers to the top of the retaining wall of the driveway, this is probably more than 8 feet, so it's significantly taller.
And the drive is
And I think
well above, it's well above the deck of the pool.
What's hard to see is that the entire yard behind the house slopes down, so it kind of planes out from that wall to the end of the wall it looks like a similar height, but they're very different when you're standing because of the slope.
And to add some context, I think that was part of the reason why the commission was okay with approving a pool in this particular location was because of the grade change on this lot, and that the pool and the area around it would be kind of sunken down from, looking at the house from the front of it, so.
Alex, I'm glad you mentioned that because I have a couple questions. The first is for you, and that is, do the guidelines allow for, or standards, excuse me, allow for consideration of visibility from right-of-way in considering impact and appropriateness or congruity with historic buildings?
I think the answer to that is yes, because I think that's just a general premise in the world of historic preservation. It's not explicitly stated that in the standards, unless we're talking about, usually we're talking about the building facades themselves and impacts to like a non-character defining facade, for example, like if someone wanted to add window or door openings, I think the standard speaks to that a little more directly, but I think we generally, make the same interpretation for changes to rear yards as we would for the building itself, where there's more latitude for changes because it's more of a private space. It's not visible from the street usually unless it's got an alleyway or something abutting it.
And do the findings of fact in the decision from that earlier COA application include that as a fact that they considered, that this board considered?
That I don't know. I can look while we're talking to see if that's, we had a, 2018 was when we started to switch over to Google. So we probably still have some paper records that we didn't necessarily have digital copies of them, but I'll look while we're talking to see. I don't recall that there was a reason clearly stated that way, but obviously we reviewed a lot of applications since then.
It would be good to know what this board considered as facts in approval of the pool and that case in total in 2018. Thank you. My questions now are for the applicant and his counsel. Were you aware that you purchased a property in a locally designated historic district?
Okay. I've become obviously much more familiar with the historic district and the compliance with the historical district, but at the time I had no idea. I lived in West Asheville. My family had been in West Asheville for 15 years. We just moved to Montford in November of 22.
So you had
November 21, so we're just kind of figuring this out.
Okay. So the whole time that you lived in West Asheville, you had no idea that Montford had design guidelines?
I would say that I was completely unfamiliar with Montford and design guidelines, yes.
Okay, thank you. You have provided photographs of other walls in Montford, freestanding walls. I have observed, I'm an architectural historian of 23 years, and I have observed some defining characteristics that are common among all of those examples. They are located along property lines, or if not along property lines, they define or differentiate public from private space. The sidewalk, which is generally considered historically to be public way, and a private yard. So they are located primarily along or very close to property lines. And all of the examples that you have provided appear to be low, 4 feet or lower. One of the examples is actually quite low and consists only of stone bollards along a low stone curbing with some chain in between the bollards. So given that the fence or the wall is not located in a similar area, can you explain, can you provide evidence how the location of the wall is consistent according to the design guidelines or is compatible with the traditional historic relationship of fences and walls to historic properties?
Sure.
Can you speak to that?
A couple things there. And I like the way that you describe the public versus the private piece, because that part is really rooted in why this has to be walled off, and that is a legal characteristic that is getting rid of an attractive nuisance, and that's why you have walls that are required by insurance companies to go around pools or fences. Here, the height of that is dictated by insurance companies. That's why it ends up at 5 feet, and I don't think there's any greater math in terms of the height of it being 5 feet, other than the fact that that's what was approved as the height in the original certificate of appropriateness. The part about the property line, at least on the western property line, that part of the wall is on the property line. We could get it out, but it's within a foot or two of your property line. But the distinction on defining between one area and another area that is required by law is absolutely the driver of where the wall is placed.
But might I ask if the prior fence did not already do that?
Certainly. No, I wouldn't say that.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a solid brick wall. The pre-existing fence sufficed to prevent that, or to deter someone from being attracted to that, nuisance.
This is anecdotal, but we did have someone swimming in our pool before the wall construction. I mean, it's very visible as if you're walking through backyards, people see it, and we've had strangers swimming in the pool when we've gotten home, which wasn't a huge deal, but this does to some extent eliminate that.
How so?
Well, it's more difficult to see. And I think that it's,
Oh, just the visual.
yeah, that's right.
But the landscaping plan, I'm just kind of giving you our reasoning.
Yeah.
Is the landscaping plan that was never fulfilled
Mhm.
would have screened the pool the way I saw the drawings on the slide previous. Sorry if I interrupted you.
No, actually, I had another thought, but it is, I'm hearing two things. One, it's an attractive nuisance. Therefore, you need this solid brick wall. The other kind of side of that is it's in an area where people aren't inclined to see it. Therefore, this wall is okay. These two things sound to me, it sounds like we're hearing the same thing, and these two things are contradictory. But I'm still interested in, the how this meets that standard number 4 about compatible with the traditional historic relationship of fences and walls to historic properties in the district.
Annie, I think I'm on a little bit of the same wavelength as you, and while I think that contextually to this property, there's a level of compatibility in the materials chosen to the existing historic house, but when I zoom out in the broader context of Montford, I lose that congruity quite a bit, because I think there are some very big distinctions in the size and scale of these walls shown as precedent and what the wall in the back of this house is doing. I'm also stuck between the two contradictory, either you can see it and it's a nuisance, or you can't see it and we can do what we want because it's in the rear yard. Those two things are in conflict for me as well. And I think that something that is, when I look at the precedent photographs, I can imagine walking past these properties and still being able to read a broader context in and around the walls in a way that that wall in the back so clearly divides the landscape from inside to outside that you don't read across it or over top of it or beyond it from either outside of the wall or from inside of the wall. And so I think that's where I struggle a little bit with the broader Montford context, even though if we weren't in a historic district, the things that you've chosen to do would have been appropriate in its own context of its own yard and its own house. And so I lose it a little bit when we zoom out to the bigger context, which is a lot of what the standards speak to in Montford, is protecting that overall
Sure.
context and
Well,
experience.
I'm gonna do that thing that you're doing now and zooming out. So I'm gonna zoom back out to the actual standard 4 that Ms. McDonald is referring to, and that's site new fences or walls in locations that are compatible with traditional historic relationship of fences and walls to historic properties in the district. This only speaks to the siting of the walls. The siting of the walls has already been approved. That's already been considered and approved by the issued certificate of appropriateness.
The siting of the fence was approved by in the previous COA. That is the sum total of the facts that were presented in 2018. Had this wall been presented in 2018, we cannot speculate what this board might have decided. But just because the location was previously approved does not mean that it is a previously approved location for the existing application, the current application.
Okay. I just know that has the siting of fences or walls, and then the next one is dealing with acceptable materials for fences. But I think that there's a distinction. That's what I was trying to draw at the beginning between the materials that are appropriate, both in the entire context of Montford, but also materials that are appropriate for the house, like this specific property, and then the siting that's appropriate in the entire neighborhood, as well as the siting for this house. Here, the siting of that fence or wall, we know it has to be, because the insurance company is telling us, and that's what was presented in 2018 or whenever that came through, and that's what was approved for the siting. And now we have this issue where the property owner has made a mistake and is trying to correct the mistake by getting approval of a new material, a wall, as opposed to the previously approved fence.
And I think that's where I question the appropriateness of the wall as a solution to the code requirement versus a fence, because I think contextually speaking and larger zooming out into Montford, fences are routinely and consistently taller than walls are, supported by the evidence that you've presented. And so if the requirement for enclosures around pools is a certain height, it is contextually more appropriate in my reading of the guidelines or standards, which I always forget to call them standards every time. A fence is a more compatible, congruent choice to solve the building code problem of fencing around pools than a wall is, largely because the precedent for walls is a much more diminutive scale that doesn't obstruct sight lines across the broader landscape from property to property. Even though there may be a physical boundary, it's still much lower, and it's more symbolic of a division between property lines and less obstructive between property lines. And so that's where I think I would have struggled in 2018 to look at the wall and the fence exactly the same as each other in this case. And so if there's a height requirement, the fence, which is consistently taller than 2 feet in every property that we can find, we can see precedent all over Montford for that solution, would have been and was in this case, I think, contextually more appropriate.
I understand.
Is there any other commissioners that have questions for the applicant?
I can't access my computer. I just wanted to point out that while you all were talking, I did add the findings of fact for the previous approval to the packet. So just to note to you, and I can send you these in an email, Derek, if you want to have a copy, but they were A, the proposed pool and paved area are in keeping with 30% the scale of the main house, and the pool is compatible in placement, shape, and material with the main house, is located behind the main house, and is congruous with the guidelines for accessory structures. Obviously, we don't have standards that specifically relate to pools, so when we were first looking, we had a little flurry of swimming pools. We were kind of like, are these accessory structures, or are they landscape features? So we kind of melded those together a little bit. But B, the scale of the landscaping and built elements are congruous with the size, scale, and design of the house in terms of the Victorian elements of the style of the house. Now I'm just gonna read the relevant ones. There's a couple about parking and the greenhouse, which is not relevant to this discussion, but, the proposed landscaping adequately screens all built elements in the parking area. The proposed scale of the site features do not overwhelm the site or substantially alter the topography or site features of the landscape. Is that helpful, Annie, to?
So they do, so the findings of fact do not address location relative to right-of-way or visibility.
I think it does in A.
Oh, okay.
It says it's located behind the main house.
Oh, okay.
And Alex, you're going to be able to share, to the extent that knowing what the original approval was based on, this shall be shared with all of you, and of course, you may have already read what the original approval was.
And
Yeah, I've got it
the
pulled
other
up.
thing that I can add into the mix here, if it's helpful, is to, I mean, it was 3 hearings, but I can add the minutes too, if the commissioners want to read them, because that's certainly where there's more, obviously this happening, where there's discussion and how we arrived to a point, which is why our minutes are always so detailed, so we can't go back and reference them when needed.
I think having those original minutes would be helpful to maybe see if the discussion included some of the things that Member Kite mentioned, about fences and walls and height and the required height of fences or of enclosures surrounding pools. Because certainly, we acknowledge that it's required by law, to enclose them, but how it's enclosed is something that, there's some flexibility on.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that there is, like as she pointed out, if this weren't in a historic district, but most often people are just putting up fences around their pools, and so it wasn't even a question in our minds. They were proposing a fence, so it was like, of course they are, so it was like,
And the
because
screening took center stage to knock down the fencing in the back of the yard
well, the whole thing, screening was important because pools were not characteristic of Montford historically speaking. And so when the commission started grappling with the whole notion of swimming pools, it was obviously in everyone's mind that they should be minimized within the landscape as much as possible, and the usual way we do that is with landscaping. And so certainly that was part of the conversation. This was definitely the most built-out pool we'd seen. The other one I could think of on Pearson was a giant lot. First of all, it's an acre. It's very wooded, and it was probably the same size as this pool, but it felt very small because it was within this big lot behind a big house. So, anyways, I don't need to go into too much about that, but just to give you some context, yes, the landscaping was certainly part of what they were trying to make sure that it was, the pool itself was not, highly present within the landscape.
And what you'll see, I think, also from that approval, and probably in the meeting minutes, is we've been focusing on this one standard. You do not have to focus on the one standard. Again, you're thinking in terms of if this came before you, without it being done, what would you approve? And as you can see in this approval, the prior approval, a lot of it was the overall elements, scale. Does it overwhelm? So I think there's something to the structures that mattered and whether something's opaque or not. And I think I remember because I was here in the meeting minutes, so that will be shared with you as well. But I just don't want you to feel like I'm only going to look at this one standard, that's all. If you see other standards that you think apply to landscape, that's within your purview to consider as well.
Thank you for that. And, I'm going to pose a general question, not necessarily to the applicant, staff, or anybody on this board, but if the intent of the screening was to minimize the appearance and visibility of the pool as an object that is not historically, a feature in Montford, does constructing a 5-foot-tall wall highlight or emphasize its visibility, or not actual visibility, but emphasize its presence, given that the wall is not located in a traditional it's not sited traditionally relative to the rest of the environment? That's just a rhetorical question, I suppose.
I think to help the applicant out, I think the way, and Alex, you might want to let me know if this is off, but there's some pushback on the material of your fence. And you have options to withdraw and apply a solution that maybe isn't 100% solid fence at this, and come back at another time to present. If this doesn't pass, you have to reapply for a certificate. So you might want to, I'm thinking there's some pushback, and you might want to understand where you need to head or where this body is asking you to look at, and you might want to come back with a proposal versus what you have proposed so far, which is what's up.
Right, so the choice is we vote or you continue based on there's some resistance.
Gather
Yeah, I
some
would
more.
just clarify too, if you wanted to, if you knew
Yeah.
that the commission was not in support of approving it as is, you could certainly propose some alternative. You could also just put the fence back in, and that way you don't need an additional CA theoretically.
Option
But
three.
just-
Sure.
yeah.
Were you able to get in touch with SHPO? By the way, I know we had talked about that and you were
I did.
going down.
So I just want to explain to the commission. So there's a North Carolina statute that gives preservation commissions a whole bunch of different things, but one is they can seek the technical advice of the Division of Archives and History or other such expert advice. We oftentimes consult a little more casually with the SHPO, but they have this formalized way in place where if you all want to seek their advice, now mind you, this is technical advice, and I might ask Commissioner McDonald to chime in, but to me, technical advice, there's not any technical advice necessarily to be given in this particular circumstance, but I could be wrong because that's not defined. So in my mind, technical advice is just technical advice. It's not theoretical or philosophical advice, so I don't really know. But I talked with the SHPO, and they said the proper way to do this would be that you would officially, if you wanted to consult with them, you would officially table the CA application and make a motion to invoke North Carolina General Statute 160D 947 to request technical advice from the HPO. And then they have 30 days to respond, and that would come in the form of an email to me that I would pass along to the commission. And there's also, I did the math because Janice and I are always trying when we have a protracted review. The statutes also dictate that the commission has to make a decision on a CA application within 180 days of receiving it. But I went back and did the math today, and we're okay if, even if so the August meeting will be 28 days, and I think the SHPO staff would work with us, even though there's 2 days in there. I think they would be sensitive to that if we needed to try to get it in for August, but even if we get to September, the September meeting would be 162 days. So we've got time if the commission wants to ask the SHPO. There are times when I think I would be more clear in my mind about the SHPO being a party that might be able to advise, and I'll just say that their advice is not binding. But I don't know that this is one of those cases. I think this is a case that's very specific to this site and to this district, and so I don't think that they are going to be able to weigh in. But I did talk with Derek about that. Just
Well, how about this? How about kind of a combination of what you're suggesting in that? Because we also want to see the minutes. I know everybody wants to see the minutes from the last one. They give us time to look at the minutes. We can look at redoing it, and we can get weigh in from SHPO and just continue it off for a month.
I mean, sorry, go ahead. I think there's, this is a unique set of circumstances, and there's certainly pressure on the applicant if we decide that the wall shouldn't be there, that it's worth taking the time in the chance that we get good guidance from the SHPO. We may not, but it seems to me worth the effort before we just make a big decision about something that we have to sort of undo someone's property in a way that is, frustrating and unpleasant for everybody, I think. So we may not get very good advice. I don't know, Annie, you might be able to shed some light on that, but I think it's worth taking our time to really make sure we feel good about the decision we have to make.
To Alex's point about the SHPO, and let me just clarify for the applicant. I worked for the State Historic Preservation Office in the Western Office as a preservation specialist for 9.5 years, working closely with restoration specialist Jennifer Cathy. My understanding is that if we ask the SHPO for technical advice, that advice is likely to come from Ms. Cathy, who's worked for the SHPO for 20 years or more now. But it may be that technical advice might come from the CLG coordinator or possibly from the deputy SHPO, Ramona Bartos, who is also an attorney. I don't know from whom we would get that advice, but if we're looking at advice from the restoration specialist, yes, she can provide technical advice on things like, is this an appropriate mortar joint for the brick? But I also think it's worth noting that design standards are rooted in the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. They do not always follow closely the Secretary of the Interior standards, but the principles are the same. The retain, repair, replace when necessary principle is the same. And I think that it would be worth letting Ms. Cathy make the decision for herself whether or not her feedback on the appropriateness of what they have falls under the guidance of technical or not.
That's up to you all. So if you want to ask them to weigh in, you just need to make a motion and vote to invoke this statute, which you can.
But before you do that, just make sure you've heard, it sounds like it's going to be continued for this and other reasons, but make sure you've heard input from all the commissioners, and I know there's one commissioner that had some information to share, but just make sure, you want to give them as much as they need if they're going to come back, if they're going to make any modifications. So for those who haven't spoken or feel strongly one way or the other, this would be your opportunity to do that.
I'd like to weigh in as a realtor. I've been practicing real estate full-time for over 10 years. And so my automatic go-to database is the multiple listing service. So during the hearing, when the homeowner was asked if he knew that if it was in a historic district or not, he said no. But then I looked on the MLS and it was presented on there that it was one of the restrictions of the property, that it's in a historic district. It also mentions historic and the year the home was built in the description, and then in the agent remarks, it also mentions that the review of the Montfort Historic District is over the property. So I just wanted to maybe add that in for the next hearing, for everybody to be able to consider that as evidence as well.
Yeah. Understanding that it was in the historic district and understanding the process for building a wall in the backyard, two very different things. So maybe I was aware that it was in the historic district, but I certainly didn't understand the process that would be required to do that.
And that listing we'll share with everyone and with you as well, just because she needs to divulge it, because obviously she's going to be basing part of her decision on that information.
I guess overall, I would like to say, as a resident of Asheville and I work with people every day in real estate, we do the best we can to disclose things as realtors, and different interpretations come up and things like that. But I think overall, my stance would be, I would not want to see the walls come down. We're not making a decision today, but I would like to see more landscaping overall around the whole pool area, like the original intent when the fence was approved and everything. I would hate to see it have to be torn down, because I know that would be difficult for the homeowners and neighbors and everyone.
Yeah, I think we want to be comfortable. We want to honor your wishes and our responsibility. So I feel to me like we need a little more time. We need more information. We need to think about it.
Sure, happy to provide.
I have a non-rhetorical question. Is any of the new retaining wall visible from the main grid? From that? So it seems to me the appropriate context is not Montford at large, it's the site itself, which has some evidence of brick retaining wall construction.
But the standards for, if you look at the standard 4, it talks about like basically traditional siding of fences and walls of the district.
I
So
get that part.
it's intended to speak to the congruity with the entire district, but obviously it does help them.
Yeah, some other context on that, on the site visit, you could see at that section of the roadway where Cumberland comes down, there's a weird little intersection there, but the roadway is well below the house. And so you have to go up to the house and then you go back down to the pool area, so it's up on a knoll. And to my knowledge, I think there are 2 pools in Montford? 3. So, you know, we're talking about very much a unicorn situation. And I would not try to bring a pool for approval to this board. So I can't wait to see the minutes from 18 or whenever that was, so.
I would say that if you decide to come back with the same proposal that you have today, that we are reviewing as though it were not in place, that you provide substantive evidence about the traditional location of walls in Montford to back up your request.
I mean, an alternative to that, and I think we were being respectful and only taking pictures of the front of people's houses, but if we started walking through the backyards of Montford and looking at things that were probably inconsistent with the historical guidelines that are presented here, like, could we present that evidence? And like one example is I have a 3-story climbing wall in the backyard of my neighbor that I can see from the pool. I could care less, but it exists. It probably wasn't approved here. So like, what would that look like if we started taking pictures of what's going on in everybody's backyard in Montford?
Well, I suppose there's a residents association, and you might even reach out through email or through that body to find out if anybody else might be willing to provide you access.
Yeah. Okay.
There are ways to go about doing that.
And I would think that, you know, certainly from my perspective and looking at that precedent that you're able to find is far more applicable to your question about this wall in this location than some of the examples that you've provided, which were obviously front yards. You know, I think that I'm looking for, in my ability to vote for the wall the way it is, I'm looking for pretty substantial evidence that what you've chosen to do in your backyard is traditionally what was happening in backyards in Montford. And so far, I don't feel like I have that yet. And I hope I can get it to that point,
I mean,
to
would
be
it
quite honest.
I feel like it'd be more than likely what we would find is that people have typically, there's a wide interpretation of what's appropriate when you go into people's backyards versus what's going on in the front yard.
Well, and that's
So-
certainly within in the standards for what we consider as well. We take a different approach to backyards and back additions in the back of houses versus the fronts too. So that's all clearly spelled out in the standards in a way that I think is easy for us to continue along that road with distinguishing between front yards and backyards.
But the precedents you'd be looking for is historic precedents or approved precedents, not just, oh, I found somebody else that did this and we didn't even know about it. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
And the climbing wall you mentioned, that's not a permanent structure. That would not have had to even come before this board. It's something that could be removed. And I mean, to the extent that it's, I mean, it just wouldn't be.
How would that not be a permanent structure any different than a 5-foot wall? Like, what's the difference? Just for my edification.
I would think it could just be removed just like a
If the
shed, a
homeownership
tool shed or
changed.
something on skids versus a brick wall.
No, this is,
Okay,
This is significant. You would be surprised.
In that case, we have an enforcement program.
Yeah, that's true, we do.
How do you think you ended up here?
I'm making well aware of.
Right.
You just
Wait, I
became the
wanna
narc.
say before we move on, if you can please include addresses for any examples that you submit, so we can, make sure they're obviously in Moffett, which I'm sure they will be, but also that we can, if we aren't sure if it was
Track
something
the
that was
history of it.
approved, we can check our files to see if a CA was issued.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that the standards have been in place for forever, but they're usually a good place for us to start, so.
And it would help me as a commissioner if we got this when we got the packet 2 weeks before, so not passing it around, so we can actually go and do site visits, because we all go on these site visits. That would help us if, as you find these things that are historic walls and how, and to Commissioner McDonald's, back to the point is how does that relationship of internal walls in backyards separated from perimeter, how I don't see it much. And that's kind of why that fence was approved, is because that's not as it's not as impactful as a
Right, but I mean, as you mentioned, the ultimate goal was for the community to see the landscaping. Like, can we not just increase the amount of landscaping around the wall? Like, would that not satisfy the commission to just simply add more mature landscaping or increase the amount of landscaping? We were talking about, there's a privacy feature to this that we preferred, and you were saying, well, it wouldn't have mattered because the goal was that there was going to be mature landscaping around it. That never really.
That's for fence, I think. When you're introducing something new, that would have been 4 feet? What is the height that you needed around?
It was 5 feet.
5 feet.
Yeah.
And then, so you've exceeded that in places slightly. And you've made it a different material. So that gets away from the standards. So we're just looking at the standards and trying to jiggle it so that.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if adding landscaping,
Yeah,
more mature landscaping is going to, move the needle with the commission. Because that's something we can do relatively quickly. We could show evidence of that relatively quickly. It's not something that's going to infringe on people's, privacy in their backyards.
I'd have to see, we can't speculate on what you're talking about, but it would be nice to see a plan, because we have to have a public hearing, and the public has to weigh in on it, call in, whatever, that all has to be, so you'd have to submit that in a plan for public.
And the reason for that is because the application is advertised as one specific thing. We can't rule on something that for which we do not have plans that was not advertised.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things we can do from here is resubmit. And so if we resubmitted an application that had landscaping, a more robust landscaping plan, like, would that be something that the commission would consider?
I think it has to be a combination of things, right? Like, I think that can't hurt, right? But then also, everyone's gotta have time to look at the meeting minutes from 2018, and then also get the SHPO technical advice. So I think it'll just be a combination of what you resubmit, so. But certainly, if you wanna beef up landscaping, or at least show it on a plan, is helpful especially because, there were only like a handful of commissioners that were able to see it during the site visit, so probably helpful.
And we did install a lot of landscaping, but it's not, mature enough. You don't really see kind of the full intent right this second. So we could go back and.
Well, we
Yeah,
do
but
it,
if you
yeah.
identify the species and locations,
Right.
then we can all tell how many.
But you can also do the rendering too. That's easy enough to do.
Sure.
Yeah. And I made a mistake. The reason I couldn't do that August one before, when we were talking about scheduling, is I'm out of the country. So if we can do
forgot about that one.
September,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Make
So
a
you first
motion.
need to do the motion to invoke the statute to consult with the SHPO, and then motion to continue to September, if you all are done with discussion, obviously.
So moved. Is there a second?
Do you have something?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have a question, and please correct me if I misunderstood, but I thought earlier in the discussion, I thought, Alex, you were going to look into whether it was relevant that the structures we're talking about are not visible from the street.
I'm not sure I follow what you're saying. Like, it is relevant that they're not visible from the street, but that doesn't mean you can just do anything in a rear yard. It still has to meet the standards. There's typically more latitude from a preservation perspective in rear yards and rear elevations of structures, but it still has to be compatible with the district as well, the standards and the overall district, character of the district. So,
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
sure.
So I'd like to move to have the State Historic Preservation Officer add technical support to this case application.
Second. So second,
All those in favor?
all those in favor, thank you. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm missing
Now-
all your cues. Now we need a motion to continue.
I'd like to have someone make a motion to continue
So May,
till September.
To September.
September meeting? So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank
Go do
you.
our homework.
Avery, I have a thing over here. My Chromebook decided to
Alex,
restart itself.
Before we
because
go to
it
the
was
next
doing
one, I just
something.
kind of have a general question. So the pavers, as an example.
Sorry, we can't talk
We can't
about it
talk
now
about
that the hearing's been
Okay.
continued.
Well, just in general, if somebody says they're gonna do something, but then it doesn't get done, what's the course of action that happens? Like,
If you all approved like a new fence, for example, and the person decided not to put up the fence, then that's no problem. But if they build the fence and it's not in compliance with the CA, then we have to take enforcement action.
like for example, in Montfort, they put in metal windows, right? They've gotta be wood windows, right? So then enforcement action is they've gotta take those out and put in.
They have to retroactively get approval to do whatever they did,
Okay.
so.
But can you also?
It's my favorite part of my job.
Clarify, Alex, you don't necessarily go in and review completed work.
That's, yeah, thank you,
That's
Oh,
is-
so you- like site, like inspections? No, we don't.
So-
It's just really because we have limited
Sure.
humans that do preservation work for the
So
city.
in theory, it gets like approved here,
We just trust
that they do
them,
it.
yep.
And in this case with the pay, they just did something different and we.
Well, in this case, we would have done the inspection and it would have been in compliance because they built it as it, sorry, I'm not supposed to talk about it, but it was in compliance and then this property owner made it not in compliance after, like long
Except
after.
for pavers, which weren't
Right.
in compliance. either.
Right,
So
that's
we
true.
would have to come back and say, oh, was this material as applicable, would we have approved the
Yeah, yeah.
paver material versus the bricks?
What forces a property owner to have to go through with that? This is from my own education, so I
To
understand.
go through with what?
To have to
To
make the
do
change,
what
they
they-
get
to
a lien on
comply
the
with
property,
it.
or they, like, don't get a.
We have a enforcement process where we issue a notice of violation and there's a $100 per day fine that's
Okay.
accruing if they're not bringing the application or the property into compliance. We're pretty friendly on the fine front. Janice can probably speak to this. I would say usually 90% of the time, property owners, if they get a notice of violation in the mail, they reach out to us and they're like, oh, what do I, how do I get this resolved? And we don't assess fines so long as that's happening. But if we don't hear from someone for a really long time or they just aren't working with us to get it resolved, then we do assess fines. And then if they don't want to pay the fine, then that gets into a whole thing and maybe small claims court and stuff. And thankfully, we don't usually go that route with HRC related stuff, but it is extremely time consuming and not fun. It involves usually conflict resolution and it's obviously worst case scenario to bring an after the fact case. case to you guys. It just happens every once in a while. And I would say, usually 90% of the time, property owners, if they get a notice of violation in the mail, they reach out to us and they're like, oh, what do I, how do I get this resolved? And we don't assess fines so long as that's happening. But if there have been times in my time with the commission that the commission has denied an application and the person has had to retroactively fix what they did, which is nobody's favorite thing to do. But it just unfortunately, it is the way that it is. And I would say that unfortunately, it's also oftentimes people who have lived in the district for a long time and know what the review process is. I'm not saying that's the case with this person, but I'm just saying that's not uncommon. So I can think, and in every instance, the decision was appealed. Our appeals of the HRC used to go to the Board of Adjustment, but they don't anymore. They now go to Buncombe County Superior Court. But in all of the cases, the HRC decision was upheld because you didn't make your decision egregiously. Or there was no, they would either have to prove that we had some technical error, like we didn't follow our own legal notification processes, or there was some technical issue with the way our meeting proceedings went, or you just acted completely out of, I like this, or whatever, you just made your decision without actually tying it to the design standards. So.
And is that you, Janice, that goes to court?
No.
I don't go to court because this is such a great quasi-judicial board. And if you use your standards, we have never had to. I used to do trainings showing you cases where historic preservation commissions went to court and lost. It's very rare. There's only about, 10 cases in North Carolina. But once you've been on this commission and you know what you're doing, when you read those cases, it's like, they did what? They just said, well, I like this, well, I don't like that. And this is what goes to court. But the after the fact is difficult. That's why we always say you have to not think about things like we've had cases that were very sympathetic where the person clearly said, I don't have money to do this. I didn't know. And this board has been sympathetic and said, we wish we could consider that, but we can't consider that. And so I think in that case, that person had to redo a fence that had been vinyl, but was given time, at least time to do it, time for people to work with. So it's hard because you have your purview and you kind of have to stick to that and stick to the standards. And it's a balancing act sometimes, but mainly err on the side of this is what I would have done if it was, because this meets the standards. Sometimes the standards aren't always perfectly clear either, which as you know, struggle with that.
And certainly we can have more discussion about this, but I would, if we can, get to this second applicant because he's been very patient and waiting, although he did tell me that he thought the discussion was interesting at least. But his item is very simple, so if we can discuss after, maybe we get through the public hearings, if we want to have more discussion on the topic of enforcement, or other questions, et cetera, related. Okay, sure.
Okay. We're on to our second item for the day. It's new business on 97 Santee Street. Install new windows within gable ends of primary structure. The applicant is Dana Reiser and Stosh Mintek.
Okay, thank you. I think I forgot to say at the top, thank you, Chair Oliva. And all of you for being here today. So this application is pretty simple. It's for adding a couple of windows or sets of windows in each of the gable ends on the front and the back of this house. This house was constructed in 2014, so it's obviously a new build. Since they originally submitted the application, they did submit revised window specifications that are aluminum clad with simulated divided lights. Originally, they had submitted vinyl specs, so that got updated based on my feedback. And so there's a bunch of different examples of arched windows and gable ends and throughout the district, especially on newer construction. So I am not noting any concerns. I think the light pattern is consistent with the rest of the windows on this house. So I'm supportive and no concerns on my end. But if you all have any questions, happy to answer.
Any questions, commissioners?
I drove that block and I didn't see any arched windows.
I don't know that there are on this block, but there's a bunch on Montfort Avenue and just like a little bit of,
On historic houses or
Google.
new houses?
there's both.
And the standard about not adding a window to the front facade?
This is a new house, though. You have to apply the standards for new construction, not the standards for windows.
Okay.
Right, the windows section of the design standards is for historic buildings versus new construction. And this isn't even like non-contributing, you just have to look at the standards for as if it were being built today, basically. Which in my opinion, I think the commission would approve this as is, if it were not built, I think, but maybe I'm wrong. You guys can tell me so. I think the windows are compatible with the house, so does anybody else have a differing opinion, or do you want to talk to the applicant first?
I think we're ready for him.
Okay.
Come on up.
Hello, my name is Neil O'Farrell. I'm the acting general contractor on the project. And I guess we're proposing to add these operable windows into the bonus room of this to make this the office space and a usable room. Structurally, it's no problem. I am having an engineer get involved because it's a truss modification and that's a requirement for the city of Asheville. But structurally, there's no problem. The design is up to you guys. I really have no cat in the fight. I'm just the hired work. So.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
Are you having to add interior stairs to access that bonus room?
There's a set of stairs in the house existing, but it is not compliant for that to be living space, and the homeowner is aware of that. And that goes back to resale values. It cannot be listed as living space or usable space until they upgrade the stairs going up there. But one thing at a time, I guess. And when it comes to completing work after it's been proposed, now that all the budgets have been put in, my client's contemplating not putting window in the rear of the house, just doing one instead of both. But they may add the second later, so we're still going to ask for approval for both, even though only half the work may be completed.
And what's the time frame for once they get approval?
So the approval would be good for 1 year. You have to start work within that 1 year. You don't have to necessarily finish it, but if you say you went 6 months beyond the expiration date and you wanted to put the window in, if it weren't still an active project, we need to review it again.
Yeah, it would be a pre-approval of already approved, which should be
Yeah, we just have to go back through the same process.
Gotcha. Well, as long as I'm the acting contractor at that point, I'll make sure that's done.
Okay.
Okay, any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't think we have any public comment.
We didn't open the last time, but.
Well, we got
We still have
to, we made a motion before we got to that point, so does that matter?
Usually you want to hear, but
Yeah.
nobody,
Yeah.
anyway, open it up and even close it
Okay.
if there isn't any.
Opening the floor for public comment? No public comment. Floor is closed for public comment. So, commissioners, any additional comments?
I
Can
do. I'm not as comfortable with the shape of the window, with the rectangle windows in the house. I think it introduces another element, but I might be on my own. I'd like other thoughts on that. And it's not divided light, it's just full glass, correct, Alex?
It's divided.
It's divided.
The lower sashes are, I forget how many lights, but the specs are in the
That's
packet.
because there was both pictures in there So that they are divided.
This is just meant to show where the placement of the window is, and then there's the window specifications in the packet that show the grill pattern.
Right. But I thought some of those were not divided, but.
Just
was
the
divided.
upper window.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
All right, well, my question to the commissioners is, does that shape work with the style of house on the, I don't know, that's where I am on it.
I'm glad you mentioned that because you're not the only one. The guidelines, if we were looking at this new primary, design new primary structures to be compatible in height, roof form, scale, massing, footprint, material, detail, fenestration, and proportion with surrounding historic buildings and other historic buildings in the district. And so that specific guideline kind of gives, or standard, seems to give a hierarchy, if you would, of importance when you look at the context. It suggests that you first look, in the other surrounding buildings and then look at the larger context of the Montford neighborhood. And to me, when I first looked at this application, I did a double take because it's so incredibly well designed to fit into Montford. I thought it was old. And I couldn't figure out why the staff report didn't identify any issues because I was looking at the guidelines for windows as well. And then I realized that it's new construction. And it seems to me that the arched shape is not consistent with the vernacular, sort of craftsman inspiration for the building, but I don't know that makes it unapprovable. And I would welcome other people's thoughts.
I hear what both of you are saying, and I think that I don't mind that look and the fact that there are others in the neighborhood. I think that makes me lean to be okay with that shape there. Anyone else?
It might be a unique shape, but it doesn't appear to me to be incongruous either with the house itself or with the neighborhood.
Any other commissioners' comments? Ready to vote? All in favor?
Sorry, there would need to be a motion.
A motion to, okay, sorry.
That's okay. I'm trying to help you because
No,
I'm like keep forgetting that it's your first meeting and like I gotta make sure I'm paying attention because I'm oftentimes looking at other things and whatever. But there does, if the commission's ready for a motion, then
Are we ready for a motion?
So somebody has to
Speak.
read the approval.
I'm sorry?
So somebody who's making the motion is going to
I'll
read
make a
that.
motion.
There you go.
Madam Chair, based upon the evidence presented to this commission, including Exhibit A, application and project description, 3 pages, Exhibit B, photos, 2 pages, Exhibit C, manufacturer specifications, Exhibit D, revised window specifications received July 11th, 2023, Exhibit E, and the commission's actual inspection and review of subject property by all members except, I move that this commission approves the certificate of appropriateness based on the following. 1, that the application is to install new casement and transom windows within gable ends on front and rear elevations. All work will be in accordance with attached and approved drawings and plans. All permits, variances, or approvals as required by law must be obtained before work may commence. 2, that the design standards for new construction primary structures found on pages 92 and 93 of the Montford Historic District Design Standards adopted on April 14th, 2010 and amended December 9th, 2019 were used to evaluate this request. 3, this application does meet the design standards for the following reasons. A, window size and location are compatible in placement, orientation, spacing, proportion, and scale with the newly constructed primary structure of those. and those of surrounding buildings, and B, new windows are compatible in material, proportion, subdivision, pattern, and detail with the newly constructed primary structure and those of surrounding structures. 4, that the action and improvements proposed in the application before us for a certificate of appropriateness are congruous with the special historic character of the Montford district.
Can we have a motion?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Based on the foregoing findings and for the reasons.
Yeah, I was. Any opposed?
I'd like to oppose.
Based upon the foregoing findings and for the reasons set forth therein, I move that a certificate of appropriateness be issued.
Second.
So it carries. Is that right? All in favor? Good Lord, sorry, guys. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So motion carries. Okay, guys.
I have a question. Is there some documentation that we could receive or training that we could receive on economic impact or what's economic hardship? Because, you know, we have heard comments today about, you know, the impact from, you know, people in the room about, you know, the impact of things on property owners. And I think considering that we have several new members, myself included, it would be useful for us to have a better handle on what economic hardship is, so that when those claims are made explicitly or implicitly, that we are better prepared to respond.
So the commission can only consider the evidence that's presented to you and the standards. Like, you have to base your decision on standards. It can't be based on, I have $5, I don't have $10,000. It can't be based on that. That being said, we do have in our ordinance that talks about demolition by neglect. It does talk about economic hardship. I think there's a small section, but our demolition by neglect ordinance is not fleshed out. And I've seen other cities that were, and it's very in-depth process that involves building safety and all these different things. But we're talking about CA applications. We're not usually talking about like demo by neglect necessarily. So
We don't have we mention demo by neglect, but we don't have the necessary mechanism in place yet. That would be an ordinance change we'd have to make. And that's the only place in the statutes, in the historic preservation statutes, where it does require that you think about economic impact. And there's actually an appeals process. And that's because demolition by neglect is often that you live in a historic district, you can't afford to fix up your house is falling down, and a commission may move to say, you need to make this, bring this up to standard. And so I think that's probably why the city has never fully adopted it, because there's even a question about that. On the flip side, there are people, say, that do have the means to keep something up, benefit from getting maybe a landmark status, and then don't do anything, and the building starts to fall apart. And that's when it would be nice to have a demolition by neglect statute, so you can take action on that. So I'd have to think about it. I can't think of any training materials that I could give you, other than just sort of what Alex said. It's not within your purview, and that's what I was trying to mention. I know it becomes, people are sympathetic, people don't want to seem like this is going to cost them so much money, and but it's already there. But the best we can do is say, you have to try to set that aside and say, what is the standard? And if somebody came along tomorrow with the same proposal, again, you'll see precedence often gets mentioned. And if this commission has approved something at one point, it's going to come back to you at some other point to say, well, you approved this. Right. And that's when you start to get into if you don't approve it and you're using the same standards, there could be some legal argument for somebody saying, now you're being arbitrary and capricious. You're not really following your standards. You're picking between people or situations. So I can try to come up with something, but I can't think of anything out there. I mean, I have better training. I thought you were going to ask for quasi-judicial stuff, and, you know, or I've got some great articles on top 10 tips for historic preservation boards and commissions, but.
I'd like to see that.
Okay, yeah, it's a real old school one. It's done by an attorney from the 80s or something, but it's all the same things. It's sort of think about your standards, don't go up. Exactly what you say in your preamble, which is why we keep that in there. It's kind of reminding both the people that are speaking and yourselves that it's not about opinions. It's not about it's about the standards, and you really don't have a lot of wiggle room. Whether you like something or not, that's not it. So, but I'll send that out.
Is that a letter to George?
It's not the letter to George.
Is that a letter to George?
No, no. But I'll
Who's George?
That's a good one too.
Yeah.
I think I have that one. I'll send that one
It's
too
all
if I have it.
that, yeah.
But anyway, so and at one point we'll get to a training because I really do want to show you these cases.
Well, I was just going to say, I didn't put it.
Beaufort, North Carolina.
I was just going to say, I didn't put it on my list of things, but I was just going to mention that we did schedule an executive committee meeting for August 1st, and we have had one since before the pandemic, in which case we were just trying to get our bearings straight a little bit. And
We tried, and then they sent us all back home again.
You're right.
That little window where we started to think we were going to
And
open
it was like, nope.
No, never mind.
Yep. So we have quite a lengthy agenda of stuff to get through, but definitely retreat is towards the top of the list. So stay tuned. We'll see what the next few months or so look like as far as getting a retreat on the calendar. And we try to do retreat. We try to do, awesome legal training, and then potentially some other kind of training, but then we also try to do something fun, like go do a tour or whatever we can come up with. So we try to, be mindful of everyone's time, but it's a nice, if we can do from 9 to 3 or 4 or something, it's nice because that really gives us enough time to do the training aspect, but then also have a little more social time together because I know you guys don't have that many opportunities to get to know each other and network and talk about all the things. So yeah, I'll ask one of the executive committee members to give an update to the full commission at the August meeting once we've been able to get together. So
I just want to thank everybody for helping me.
you did great. I'm sorry, I'm just not on the ball helping you.
Got to get there voting.
I'm so used to, I get so used to one person kind of knowing the thing, and then
I'm trying to
No, you were
not
good.
interfere.
Well, you have the gavel down.
No, I do.
Absolutely.
Previous HRC award-winning person, Mappa Code, is hosting his Skyview golf tournament yesterday, today, and tomorrow is the last day, Thursday. It's fun.
That's
Go out
right, I saw
there.
that in the paper.
The pros start in the afternoon, the amateurs, I got hit by one golf ball.
Oh, no. Okay.
I'm okay. And there's also a preservation in pints thing, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah.
On
No,
tomorrow.
not allowed.
Well, we'll redact this.
We're out of the quasi-judicial hearing.
Oh.
This is, we're out of that part of it, so you can.
Can we get a motion to adjourn, and then we can talk about?
You don't need to.
You don't have.
No, I wanted to.
No, we're in the other business where other comments from commissioners, public, and staff. We always have this built in, so it's time to make announcements or whatever. So
Was that Thursday at 5 at Highwire, the new Highwire line?
Is that the Preservation Society? Or who's
Yes.
putting that? Okay.
Yes.
Preservation Pines. Yeah.
another thing that I didn't put on here, but I just want to mention because I know a couple of you asked me about it, the Biltmore Village curb ramp issue that probably not everyone knows about, but we had an enforcement case with the NCDOT that's been for sure the most fun enforcement case. Not really. It definitely doesn't top the Donald Nicholson one. Close though. But where they replaced a bunch of curb ramps down there with concrete, and the standards call for brick. So it came to the commission once back in January for everyone who was here for their first meeting, which was 6 hours long. That we've been pushing and tugging with DOT on since then, and they have decided out of the blue to change course and do the right thing. So we're going to be able to work it out administratively, so it won't come back to you. So hooray.
There's still bricks over by La Cantina.
They didn't do everything, they just did a few.
There's a pile of bricks
That
there.
makes sense. Our public works department was supposed to go pick up the bricks, and I'm sure that they
So is that
did a
something
great job of that.
should- Okay.
I'll let somebody in public works know.
Okay.
Did DOT say that they would maintain the walls if they were forced to be made out of brick papers?
The city would have to maintain them either way. It's some weird, I'm not sure I understand why that's arrangement set up that way, but they build them and then the city maintains them. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could say a lot of things, but obviously they can be built out of brick. That much we know at this point. So yeah, that's a good news for that, and I think that will go a long way to the Merchants Association of saying, you know, we're all in this with you and doing what we're supposed to be doing for this district. So,
Alex, do you know what prompted them to change course?
no idea, because the last communication that we had with them, they were, I don't know, pretty much like, well, what are you going to do about it, city? And we were like, well, here's what our normal enforcement process is, and because we haven't issued a notice of violation to them, just because we're just trying to work this out, and we told them what our next steps would be, and then I thought it would just go to the legal department to be a you know, prolonged battle, but so your guess is as good as mine. I don't know.
It's a good outcome.
Yeah. Oh, it's the best outcome. I just went out like, could they have?
Came back here.
Oh yeah. I just was like, how is this going to go over? I mean, yeah. And I was also wondering, why won't the SHPO like just get them to at least work with, like, because they were really unbending and hard to work with.
It may be that they talked to SHPO.
And that's what happened.
That may be.
Maybe.
They have a hard surface. That's their motto.
They like a lot of paved area. No trees, just pavement.
Yes.
Definitely not any attractive pavement.
But
Only
the lesson
concrete.
learned is, whoever the applicant is, the standards apply.
Yeah.
Period. Unless they can somehow show otherwise, which they couldn't, so. And again, that's intimidating. People are like, oh, it's DOT, you know? So the standards apply.
I have a couple of other things, sorry, and then I'll stop talking, but these things are just coming to me in the moment. Next Friday, public event for Pack Square Visioning. If you're interested, I'm sure it's on our website on the Pack Square Visioning project page. That will be probably the last public engagement event before that document, the vision plan, gets published. The Friday after that is the next public engagement event for Missing Middle Housing Project, if you're interested in chiming in with that. Annie.
I actually have to talk to you about that.
Okay. And then,
Where is the Pack
Third.
Square visioning?
there's a history, it's at the library, in the Lord Auditorium, in the downstairs at the library.
At what
Missing
time?
Middle, I think the history session starts at 10. Avery, can you would you mind pulling up the project
Oh, I
papers?
can just go on. Well, unless someone's watching on TV.
For the Pack Square Visioning and the Missing Middle housing events, would you mind grabbing that info real quick? Darn it, and the third thing I had was important, and it just went out of my head. I'll send out an email if I think about it, but anyways, just to make sure you guys are, oh, I know what it was. Vacancy on Planning and Zoning Commission. I thought of you if you need something else to do when you leave us. Anyways, I'm just pitching that out there just because I think our staff liaison to that commission he's newish. He's been with us for like a year and a half,
but probably isn't as networked as might be helpful to try to get some new members that might be a good fit for that. So if you guys, know of any people with great technical knowledge in construction and architecture and design and landscape and all the things, that would be awesome if you could maybe put a plug in for the P&Z vacancy or vacancies that are out there right now.
Alex, do you know if that's a county appointment or a
I think it's a city.
They're just city, because there's a county planning department.
No.
But there's one, there's one at large.
It's-
They're both?
There's a provision that we need to appoint people from the county on the planning zoning
For the city.
for the city. So so I think there's 2 members that need to be appointed by the county.
Is that because of the ETJ?
That's a holdover from when the legislature took away our right to annex, no, also to control the ETJ. So, yeah, it makes sense when you're in the ETJ to have members from both the city and the county, but that's carried on to continue to have that.
So you think it's a city seat, a city appointment?
I believe it's Joe's seat, but he's not done yet, but I think August is his last.
Okay, well, we can chat.
Yeah, we can
that.
find out. So those are all my plugs to, if you guys want to do more things with your. But seriously, I think that the engagement things for these big projects we have going on are certainly meaningful for everyone to participate in if you have the time and inclination, because they are very important projects that will have, important and long-lasting impacts.
Did they close the survey for the Pax Square engagement? Probably, it's been a while ago.
Possibly, I don't know. I can find out. When I'm at my desk tomorrow, I'll just recap all this in an email and send you some links to where you can find the project.
And George's letter.
And George's letter and top 10 tips.
Okay. Anyone else?
Sue's ready to be done for
We
the
just
day.
need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Sarah, do you want this?
I don't want to take it home.